And I also want to say thank you. This is my first event as the new director of the Faith and Reason Institute, so thank you for your trust in passing the baton to me. Our institute was founded in the early 2000s while Father Spitzer was president of Gonzaga, with generous donations from people who were inspired by him and by his vision. We fund all our activities on the interest from that endowment after accounting for inflation, so that benefaction will be effective in perpetuity. So we begin by thanking those donors for their generosity for making all of this happen almost 20 years later. But also by thanking Thane McCullough, who helped carry the Institute forward during his time as president. And even more, perhaps, a thank you to President Passerini, who has just taken the helm, president of Gonzaga, and who's been extremely supportive, not just of our institute, but of the larger task of ensuring that Gonzaga University is a Catholic university. I'm really grateful for her guidance. But what does that mean to be a Catholic university? Well, among other things, it is, as St. John Paul II says, to be a place where the church does her thinking. That thinking is multi-stranded, but one important strand is the encounter between faith and reason, between revealed truth and truth that can be discovered using the human intellect, and in particular, between religion and science. The dominant strand of Catholicism has always been open to science, and indeed to the science of the world, secular and atheistic science even. This is not an obsequious relationship, and sometimes Catholicism has been called on to produce prophetic denunciations of flawed science. For example, the flawed biological racism of the late 19th century. In other cases, however, from this encounter with science, we learn and grow and adapt, and our spiritual lives are enriched by new scientific research. Father Spitzer is a master of showing the ways that science is not a threat to faith, as you will see over the course of the next 2 nights, but rather since, and to the extent that, science leads to truth, it leads us to God, and thereby strengthens faith in the long run. Our conviction that these two things belong together is not some idle fancy or wishful thinking. It's rooted in the ancient synthesis, perhaps most powerfully expressed by Thomas Aquinas, who shows that grace does not destroy nature, but completes nature. And of course, that systematic theology is rooted in the deep truth that the second person of the Trinity is both the Jesus who died on the cross and the eternal Word through whom all things, all of nature, was created. Our institute provides a forum for this dialogue between faith and reason, between science and theology, to occur, and most importantly, for the results of that dialogue to be presented to the public. You can easily find our institute by Googling Gonzaga Faith and Reason, and you'll find announcements there about things we're holding. But you can also find a link to put your name on an email list. We send out emails twice or 3 times a year to let you know things that are happening on campus. I've noticed a few little glitches on that website, so if you're getting irritated, you can just email me again directly, and it's for sure on the Philosophy Department website, and I'll put you on that list. But now what you're really here for, I want to introduce Father Spitzer. Spitzer holds a number of academic degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in Public Accounting from Gonzaga, a Master's in Arts and Philosophy from St. Louis U, a Master's in Theology from Cambridge, a Master's in Divinity and Theology from the Gregorian University in Rome, a PhD in Philosophy from the Catholic University of America. He's taught at Georgetown, Seattle U, and Gonzaga, where he was also our president from 1998 to 2009, which was a period of sustained growth and at the same time increased selectivity. I don't think half my friends from my undergrad years would have gotten into this new Gonzaga. Father Spitzer now has a public teaching ministry through his Magis Center. He is a regular presenter on WTN, Catholic Radio, and has appeared on multiple TV, radio, and other internet media. He's a prolific author. He's published a number of important scholarly articles and written a mind-boggling number of books. I think it's 20.
Yeah.
But when I run out of fingers and toes, that's as high as I can count. Slightly higher than the He's debated Stephen Hawking, Leonard Malraux, and Deepak Chopra on national television. It's a professional honor to introduce such a world-renowned scholar and public intellectual. Please help me welcome Father Robert Spitzer of Society.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. Thanks so very much, everyone, for honoring me with coming out tonight and So, great numbers. And what a beautiful place Spokane is. I came up from California thinking I was going to be shivering in the snow, but alas, I got greeted with great California weather. So, but I'm so honored to have all of you here, and Dan, thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm going to speak tonight about miracles, tomorrow about angels and demons, but for tonight's talk, I want to look at the scientific investigation of miracles. It has become fairly prolific in the last 30 years. But of course, institutions like the Medical Bureau at Lourdes go back 140 years, and so just to let people know, this has been going on for a long, long time. I'm not going to talk about the theory of miracles, except to say, by introduction, obviously you can't have a scientific proof for a miracle, because science is based on observation. Observation has to come from the natural causes, the observation of the natural universe. It focuses on natural processes. And so how are you going to use a science that is devoted to exploring natural processes to prove a supernatural event? That's not going to happen. On the other hand, you can come to a very indirect view that there's a likely miracle that's taking place by looking to see whether a particular phenomenon, under the scrutiny of science, scrutiny of rigorous science, actually doesn't look like it is going to be explicable in terms of science, of natural processes, either now or even in the future. So we can come to some sense that if we really have a grasp on much of natural science, and of course physicists think all the time that they do have a grasp of it, and then something new is discovered and that throws the whole process off. But nevertheless, you can slowly but surely get to a preponderance of evidence where you begin to see certain events just don't correspond to, are not explicable in terms of natural processes and scientific explanation. So I'm just going to illustrate that phenomenon today rather than debate the theory of it. I'm just going to talk about 8 or 9 things that have happened that have baffled a majority of doctors for sure, and certainly have baffled a number of good physicists and a number of chemists for sure. I'll give you the extent of miracles that have been subject to scientific investigation. I think at Lourdes alone, we have 7,000 miracles that defy scientific investigation that have been very closely scrutinized by the Lourdes Medical Commission, just as a starter. Between the last 3 popes, that would be John Paul II, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis. Of course, I'm not going to count Pope Leo because he's been around for a few days. But the point is, those 3 popes alone have canonized well over 1,000 saints. Well, you have to have two miracles that have been at least scientifically certified by, a group, maybe of 7 scientists, physicians, etc. And so you're basically looking at well over 2,000 miracles just with respect to the canonization of saints, and 2,000 scientific bodies that have been convened in order to explore that. So miracles are by no means non-events today. There is a huge number of miracles that have happened, certainly in the last 50 years, certainly that have been explored by very competent scientists, many of them, we'll see 2 of them tonight, by Nobel Prize winners, and who just simply say, this is not naturalistically or scientifically explicable. It's just something we're left with. The interpretation is left to you. If you want to call it a miracle, you can. If you want to say, now there's going to be something discovered in the next few years, quantum mechanics will be completely reversed, and so will all the processes of general and special relativity. Up to you. But the point is, if you're not willing to go that far, you've got some real doozers here, and I'm going to get to the point of it right now. I'm going to start with Eucharistic miracles, then I'm going to take a look at what's going on in the whole area of the Tilma of Guadalupe. Again, some very good, fine scientists have looked at this. And I'll talk a little bit about Guadalupe if you're not familiar with that miracle. And then finally, we're going to take a look at Lourdes. This is the place of Bernadette of Subiru, who basically, had the apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. During that time, the many days of that apparition, she, of course, discovers a hitherto unknown source of water, which becomes, of course, the font for the Lourdes water that is the source of the 7,000 miracles that have been scientifically investigated, medically investigated by the Lourdes Medical Commission. And so we'll take a look at just a few of those, and just, again, it's up to you, the judgment you want to make. But one thing is for sure, at the current time, science, medicine has just run out of naturalistic and scientific explanation. Let's start with these three miracles of the Holy Eucharist. In general, there are many more than these three. These three particular miracles, the one from Buenos Aires in 1996, actually was overseen by Pope Francis initially when he was Archbishop Bergoglio in Buenos Aires. Then we have the Tixtla miracle of 2006, which we'll talk about, sort of a bleeding host that continues to bleed, or at least it was bleeding up to 5 years after the miracle itself. And talk about the investigation of it. And then this very interesting miracle at Sokolka, which went through electron microscopy and truly gives us an insight into the connection between living heart tissue growing out of a consecrated host and the consecrated host itself. So in general, let's just call a Eucharistic miracle then one where you can actually see living heart tissue growing out of a consecrated host. We're not talking about blood that is smeared on a host. That could easily be manufactured. You're not going to be able to, show anything scientifically as unusual with that. But if you have living heart tissue growing out of a consecrated host, two vastly different substances, and those two vastly different substances are connected with each other under electron microscopy on the level of the thin filaments of the myofibrils. That's like a few micron cell lengths of separation. That becomes something very interesting indeed, which has converted the doctors, the pathologists, the medical personnel, the scientists who have examined it, along with validated the electron microscopy that validated it. That becomes something that is interesting, something that is not easily explained naturalistically or scientifically. Let's start with the first one there, the Buenos Aires miracle in 1996. At that time, a host was discovered. Maybe it was taken by somebody who wanted to use it for maybe nefarious or diabolical purposes. But anyway, they took the host at communion, left it at the back of the Church of St. Mary's in Buenos Aires there, and kind of abandoned it at the back. It was discovered by a sacristan who, believed that it was definitely a consecrated host that was given out during a Holy Communion. So, of course, the priest did the natural thing. The host was filthy, various reasons why it was. And once that happens, you cannot consume it in the regular way of ordinary piety. You put the host into water. The water, of course, the host will dissolve in water. Certainly within a week, it should be completely dissolved. And then it is very, piously put into a place where the water can be disposed of that'll go directly into the ground. Okay, so what happens? This host is placed in a glass of water. And I just want to say that the total amount of time here, first of all, it was placed in water for 5 weeks, or 4.5 weeks. Then it was removed, and then one could see actually what appeared to be, flesh. I mean, obviously, it's not just blood smeared on there. There's actual growth that is coming out of this host. And of course, needless to say, that's highly unusual. You can see that picture there. It's kind of hard to see the three-dimensional part of it, but there are some very good pictures that are available of this host. But in any case, when this happened, they thought, well, maybe this was some impurity in the water, and maybe we should just put it in distilled water, and that should take care of the problem, quote unquote. Well, they put the host with this obvious growth that was coming out of it into distilled water for 3 years. Luckily, Pope Francis said, we really ought to take some pictures of this. Take pictures of the host, take a picture of the very close-up pictures of the tissue that appears to be growing out of this host. So he ordered that the pictures be taken, but the pictures were of excellent quality, and you could see morphologically, you could see the striated cardiac tissue that was growing out of the host. And of course, this became very interesting to the people that were obviously storing it in Buenos Aires there in this distilled water. Well, after 3 years, Pope Francis, asked that there be an examination of this host scientifically. So they intentionally chose a person, Dr. Castellan Gomez, who basically said, well, the first thing is I need to tell you I'm an atheist, I don't believe any of this stuff. And Pope Francis, as you might imagine, said, great, that's just the kind of guy we want, So have at it and look at this host. So he did, and needless to say, he begins with microscopy, but a powerful light microscopy, and he can see clearly after 3 years and a month in water, and distilled water at that, he can still see all the morphological indications of cardiac tissue. So he goes, I'm telling you, this looks like real heart tissue. And he goes, I wonder if we can type the blood in it. So, of course, they did, an attempt to type the blood, and it turns out to be AB blood type. This will become relevant momentarily. By the way, it's the same blood type as the Shroud of Turin, and as we shall see, it's the same blood type of the other two Eucharistic hosts I will be talking about, restricted to 4% of the population, more or less. The rarest blood type. Okay, so they identify the blood type. They say, this does look like cardiac tissue, but who can tell? This needs to be, examined, by an expert, a pathological expert. And so, of course, they send it up to Columbia University, where one of the very most prestigious pathologists in the world, Dr. Frederick Zugabe, is there teaching and also running the pathology lab for New York City, a place that's replete with murders and lots of a place where you can have expert testimony coming about heart tissue. Zugabe examined this, but Castellan Gomez, he's beginning to think, maybe I shouldn't be so hasty about being an atheist. But he just decides, he says, let's not reveal to Zugabe where this came from. Let's just get, his analysis without it. So Zugabe looks at it, and he's amazed. He says, where did you get this tissue? Because they basically took some slices, very thin slices of the tissue, put it between large pieces of glass for preservation, and sent them up to the pathology lab in Columbia, without, identifying it. So he's looking at it, and he says, there might be problems here. How did you get this tissue? And Castellan Gomez goes, well, why do you ask? He says, because there's leukocytes. There's living white blood cells in that tissue. And the only way you could have living white blood cells in a tissue that has been disconnected from an embodied circulatory system after 3 hours is if you took that out of living tissue. How did you identify the tissue? I mean, did you kill a guy to get the tissue? I mean, this is, it's extraordinary. And 50, and then he goes, okay, I got to speed it up. Like, anyway, he goes on to question, them, and he says, the other thing I discovered is that those white blood cells are embedded in the wall of the heart tissue. So he identifies the heart tissue as coming from the upper left ventricle, near the place where the blood is, pumped to the rest of the body. So he says, the tissue comes from that ventricle wall, and the white blood cells are embedding themselves into the ventricle wall, indicating that the heart tissue was wounded, that the heart tissue underwent some kind of a polytrauma, right? White blood cells, right, by the way, as you know, they're blood cells that are healing. They phagocytize lipids, and when they engulf those lipids, harmful fat cells, basically they help the healing process. So the fact that these are there and they're living indicates that the tissue must have been either embodied or connected to an embodied circulatory system, or that the tissue was taken from a man with a beating heart. But he said, I can't think of another explanation. So I told you what I found. Where did you get it? And they said, we got it from a Eucharistic host, consecrated Eucharistic host. Now, Zugabe just happened to be a Catholic, but he basically just went, he couldn't believe it. He said, are you absolutely sure? Well, Archbishop Bergoglio, was overseeing the whole process. He's a pretty reliable guy. He wasn't Pope yet, but still, he's a pretty reliable guy. Here's the photographs, and they showed it to him, and Zugabe was just awestruck. Of course, they went on and gave the tissue to other, pathologists in Australia, other cardiological experts in Europe, and they all got the same thing. There's living white blood cells embodied in that tissue, and it is wounded tissue. It has undergone some kind of a polytrauma. So that was the end of that. And people thought, extraordinary, but perhaps a hoax. Who knows? The problem, though, is when you look at it, even with strong light microscopy, it doesn't appear to be superficially connected to the host, to the consecrated host at all. It is deeply intertwined with the interior of the Eucharistic host. And that makes it much more difficult to explain. More on this in a moment. Then we jump to 2006. 2006, there's a sister who is, she's in charge of taking the Holy Eucharist to the homebound, to their homes. And of course, she takes a large number of hosts and puts it into a very large pyx, and she's going to distribute them at home. And she looks down into the pyx, and she discovers there that this host seems to be bleeding, and that the blood is kind of traversing the host there. And so she goes to the priest who's, distributing communion, and she, look at this, And so the priest looks down at that and goes, whoa, that's highly unusual. So he basically says, you better put that in the tabernacle. So, but he luckily did not have it put into a glass of water. He just said, put it on a corporal. Let's take a look at this thing later. Well, I'm going to, because of the time charge, I'm going to get to a lot of other things. I'm just going to tell you what the story is. After 45 days, I'll just skip. Here's the results. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to take too long to explain the stories. I just want to go through some miraculous parts of this blood. First of all, in that host, we see something like we saw in the Buenos Aires host. You can see a spongy part toward the left, the right-hand side of the middle of the host as you're kind of looking at the blood flow. You can see the spongy area, and the spongy area has been subject to investigation. Although it's hard to identify cardiac tissue in the middle of the host, you can definitely see microscopically the elongated blood cells that belong to the heart with the contraction nodes as well that are embedded in this tissue. So they're very certain that it is, again, cardiac tissue, but not from a striated tissue, not from morphological examination. It had to be a microcellular investigation. So the first thing that happens is, okay, well, what about this blood? So the blood is issuing from that little centerpiece there. And as the blood is going along the surface of the host, oddly, it is filling in underneath the bloodstream. So you've got layers of blood that are, you can see it, and you can see that the top layer is the most coagulated, and you can see then underneath it the next, a substantial part of the coagulation, and another layer, going all the way to the bottom layer, which is fresh blood. You can also, several tests were performed to see whether or not the blood is actually pressured to move out from the spongy tissue up to the outer part of the host to travel along the surface of the host. 3 different tests were performed to see this. Now you can tell very easily, because if somebody tried to inject some blood into that tissue, it would reach, basically a stasis, an equilibrium very, very quickly. But if you can actually see the blood emerging, and you can identify it, that it is emerging from that spongy area over the course of hours, there's just no way that blood was introduced, and made to look like it was traversing the host. It seems to be being produced from the spongy material, and it is issuing, it's being pushed out from this tissue and flowing along the surface of the host. Okay, 4 things are important besides those, the tests of the pressure. The first thing is that blood that is flowing there, you can see under the microscope macrophages, that's a kind of like leukocyte, macrophages that are literally engulfing, they're phagocytizing these harmful fat cells. You can see that this is actually going on. So it's unquestionable that the white blood cells are definitely present and alive in the blood. But secondly, you can see red blood cells that are also living in the blood. The blood then is fresh. And of course, in the bottom layer there, you can see the very fresh living blood cells, red blood cells that are present in the tissue. When you look at that blood, it is without a doubt human blood. It has, of course, AB blood type. It has human immunoglobulins, human hemoglobin, human bilirubin, human whole blood. So it's a human being. And of course, those of you who are biology people here, or doctors who are here, I know there's several of them. What's the first thing you do when you see blood like that, coming out? If you're curious anyway, well, you want to do a DNA testing. What's the DNA of the tissue, the blood, the tissuing from the tissue? Well, you've got fresh blood and you got a big, huge sample. You shouldn't have a problem getting a good DNA read on that. But they can't. It was subjected twice to polymerase chain reaction to amplify a DNA profile. No DNA profile was amplifiable. The same thing held true with the Buenos Aires house. But the Buenos Aires house was not kept under the same scientifically, pure conditions that the Tixtla host was set under. But now you have, if you've got living blood with blood cells, you can't say the blood was not fresh, you can't say the blood was too old, can't say the sample was not large enough, yet no reaction, polymerase chain reaction, but yet it's AB blood type. It's human immunoglobulins, it's human hemoglobin. We can see the remnants of DNA molecules, so definitely there was DNA present, but you can't amplify a profile. In fact, this is going to be the problem with all three hosts. You can't amplify a profile by PCR. And that, of course, it's got everybody stumped. I'm not so stumped by it because I got my own theory, which I'll explain at the end of this thing. But for the time being, it is a problem. Again, we can see that just by the presence of the white blood cells, in the blood and so forth, the tissue has to be wounded. So it's undergone some kind of trauma or even polytrauma that has led to the proliferation of these living white blood cells that are actively, even 5 years after the beginning of the miracle in 2006 and 2011, it is still going on with these white blood cells that seem to be indicating that this is living tissue. Hold on to that for just a second. Let's go to 2008, to Sokolka, Poland. Again, a host was dropped during a mass in a church there in Sokolka. The pastor, of course, does the usual thing, puts the host in water because there's no evidence of any kind of tissue or blood at that point. However, the priest asked the sacristan to go into the tabernacle where the glass was that had the water where the host was put into. And so the sacristan went and opens the tabernacle, and she said, well, it smelled like almost there was fresh loaf of bread in that tabernacle. But she looks inside and she sees the host, and she sees obviously that red impression, which looked to her like it wasn't just a liquid, because the liquid should have dissolved. Well, the host should have dissolved too, but you can see that it persists. So of course they decided to make a long story short, after leaving that on a corporal for the better part of 2 years. They leave it on this corporal, and of course you can still see the host. So the host hasn't dissolved. It's the same with the Buenos Aires host, the same with the Tixtla host. Being put in, well, not the Tixtla host because it wasn't put in water, but the Buenos Aires and the Sokolka hosts were put into water. Should have dissolved long ago, but there's still obviously very clear remnants of the host. And what's interesting is that the tissue has not undergone substantial, autolysis. It hasn't decomposed, very much at all. And you think, well, gosh, with the Buenos Aires host, you stick that thing in water, distilled water for 3 years, you'd expect a lot of decomposition. It really, you could still see, as I said, morphologically, the striations of cardiac tissue. The same thing holds true here. So, of course, these pathologists, basically, and micropathologists too, who are interested in this, they went to the University Medical School at Białystok to two doctors, Dr. Elizabeta Lotkowska and Dr. Stanislaus Sulkowski. Now, Sulkowski has a publishing record off the ground. The guy ain't no dummy. And of course, the main thing to remember is that Sulkowski and Lotkowska did electron microscopy independent of one another. So these two pathologists came to the same conclusion. They are looking at this tissue. It's the same as we saw in Buenos Aires, right? The tissue is literally growing out of the host. And the tissue that's growing out of the host is identifiable as cardiac tissue, not only morphologically, but again, you can see the elongated cells, you can see the contraction nodes, you can see that this is cardiac tissue quite clearly. But what they wanted to do was use electron microscopy, electron microscopic analysis, to look at the linkage between the host and the heart tissue itself. Oh, by the way, it is living heart tissue, because in the Sokolka host, you can see what's called fragmentation and segmentation in the host. It's a very rare phenomena, but it happens in human hearts, just before death. So let's say 5 minutes before death, the heart starts rapidly beating. It's almost as if it's trying to keep itself alive. But and so it beats so fast, right, that it's literally tearing itself apart. Now this is particular to cardiac tissue. So the interesting thing for Lukowska and Luskowski is they go, well, it has to be non-necrosed tissue, right? The minute the tissue dies, the fragmentation and the segmentation is just going to, as it were, melt into the mush of the non-living tissue. So the main thing to remember then is the electron microscopy is done on this living tissue. It still has its firmness. It still has that fragmentation and segmentation there, as if these things are held in place by the living tissue itself. So when they look at it, as I just said, it is connected on the level of the thin filaments of the myofibrils. These teeny little fibers, right? And you can see that it's not only woven into, you've got two vastly different substances, right? So, the host is going to be like bread molecules, as it were, if I could put it that way, that are very different from living heart tissue. Yet you can see that the intertwining of the two substances on this very, very microscopic level of teeny, you can get, maybe 2,000, 3,000 hairs, myofibrils in one hair almost. It's very, very small level. And you look at that and you go, wow, that is, unbelievable. And you have a complex weave that's very tightly, closely knit weave at this very close level. And both Lukowska and Sulkovsky said, we have no technology, not at NASA, not anywhere, that can produce this kind of close connection between these two vastly different substances, non-living bread molecules, as it were, connected to living cardiac tissue on this close level. We have no technology that can do it. And they have published their results. And by the way, if you really want a whole bunch of articles and a whole bunch of details about these hosts, you could go to Magis AI, an AI that I just made with some colleagues of mine. You just go to your Apple store, or you just copy these QR codes that I'll give you at the end, and it'll just ask any questions about it you want. And my footnotes are having problems coming out right now. I'll get it done though soon. But the thing though is you can get all the details you want. You can say, I'm not a scientist. You can say I'm a 5th grader. You can say I'm a postgraduate student at Columbia, whatever. It'll adjust to your level, of academia. But anyway, you could go, to look at the sources of this. And I'm telling you, this thing is really something. It is very difficult to explain. And it pushes scientists to a point where, there doesn't seem to be an available naturalistic explanation. And that's just something to think about. Now, I don't think you can say it's a fraud. I don't think any of the pathologists who looked at this, any of the blood experts who looked at it, microscopy experts that have dealt with all three of these hosts, they're not going to say anything like, this is a fraud. It's beyond fraud. We don't have technologies that can produce this. So we got to find some other explanation. It certainly is not algae. It is certainly not a substance that is growing out of the host in some naturalistic way, because it's heart tissue. And it has all of the identifiable features of heart tissue. And it's alive. I mean, it's disconnected from an embodied circulatory system, and at the same time, those white blood cells and those red blood cells continue to live 5 years after the miracle started. All I can say is, perhaps Zugabe's reaction is the most appropriate of scientists. Speechless. That's all. I'll just leave it at that. Ask your questions. I can try and clarify your questions. Let's move over to the Tilma of Guadalupe. Some of you have heard of this miracle, maybe some of you haven't. Just to make a long story short, 1531, you've got Juan Diego, an Indian who is on Tepeyac Hill, right out, now today within Mexico City. He is up there in the mountain, confronted by the Blessed Virgin Mary, right? The Blessed Virgin Mary comes and says to him, well, Juan Diego, I want, a church built on this. I promise I won't get into the story too much, just to the science. But anyway, Juan Diego goes, well, how am I going to do that? Go see the bishop. And he goes, oh, I'm just an Indian guy, I just can't go in and talk to Bishop Zumarraga, can't do this. So the Blessed Virgin Mary says, yes, you can. So just go and trust me. So of course he goes off, and the bishop, says, no, I'm not going to do that, but you can redeem yourself by bringing back something of interest to me, some sign, that the Blessed Virgin Mary is really appearing to you. So Juan Diego goes back, and his uncle gets sick and is in danger of death. So he decides to avoid the Blessed Virgin and get a doctor and a priest for his uncle, who he thinks is going to die. So he tries to avoid her going around the hill, but no. She goes, Juanito, where are you going? And he goes, surprised. He goes, well, my uncle is sick. She goes, don't you know I'm your mother? He's not going to die. You just got to trust me. Now, I want you to stick with the plan here. And I'm going to give you something that'll convince the bishop, basically. So he goes to the mountaintop, and he sees all these Castilian roses that don't grow anywhere in Mexico City. And she says, gather those up into your tilma there, big sort of a smock almost that the Indians wear, and you can just roll it up and put the roses in there. And so he goes and carries the roses to Bishop Zumarraga. Bishop Zumarraga says, what have you got to show me? So he unfurls the tilma. The roses, the Castilian roses, which the bishop had been thinking about, pour out of the tilma. And then, all of a sudden, they can see this image of the Blessed Virgin Mary on this tilma. It's a very unusual image in the eyes of science, as we shall see in just a moment. But at the time, it was not known. Everybody is just shocked in Bishop Zumarraga's retinue there. And so the bishop says, okay, something happened to you, and I don't know how you got those roses, and I don't know where that picture came from, but that picture looks better than any of our artists could have done, and you don't look like you've been educated to do that. So the bishop gets convinced, and I'll just tell you, after nearly 500 years of history, a lot of miracles have been associated with that tilma. But, most interesting for me anyway, is the time when during the Troubles, in Mexico, a terrorist basically took a huge bomb, put it right underneath the tilma. The Tilma was not in a glass frame or anything. It's just there, hanging for, pilgrims to come and see. Kaboom! This thing happened. Blows out all the windows in the church, takes a solid bronze cross that's about 2.5 feet high and bends it over backwards all the way until the top of the cross is touching the table. And a lot of other things get destroyed. There's not a mark on that Tilma. Not a mark. It's as if nothing happened. It's the same old Tilma as it was. Now, let me tell you, just, having, a lot of experience building bombs when I was a kid, this is highly unusual. This is highly unusual. But anyway, the church is built. In fact, you can visit it today. You can do a pilgrimage. But I want to get to the science behind the Tilma. It starts in about 1951. And in I'll just say, let me just outline it because I'll run out of time. Just make note of the following 5 things. The first thing is, this is an agave cactus fiber Tilma. The ordinary longest extent of age for a Tilma made like this is probably about 30 years. Let's go ahead and give it 100 years, though we do not have any such thing, any similar agave cactus that ever lasted 100 years. This one has lasted nearly 500 years, and it looks really good. From a microscopic point of view, that Tilma has undergone almost no decomposition. Utterly bizarre. Molecularly and organically, it should not exist. But it does. But then you get to that painting of the Blessed Virgin Mary that's there. Now here, I'll just give you a few of the details. Is the picture up? Yeah. If you look at that picture, you can see rays coming out of the Blessed Virgin Mary's head, and you can see a moon underneath her with some angels that are kind of nearby the moon, etc. Those things were painted later. And they were painted with pigments and with tints that were typical natural pigments and tints. They didn't have any synthetic pigments in 1531. So obviously they're natural pigments. But you can see on the rays and on the moon, you can see all kinds of flecking, smearing, decomposition, the deterioration of the coloration of the pigment, etc. They're very clear. Every thing that got painted beyond the regular picture of the Blessed Virgin there, it's all decomposing. It's all losing its coloration. Not the Tilma. The image of the Blessed Virgin has not undergone any decrease in coloration, any decrease in brightness. It hasn't flecked, it hasn't segmented, it hasn't, deteriorated, it hasn't smeared in any way. What's the reaction of most people? That's impossible. So it got Dr. Philip Callahan to do an infrared analysis of this picture. He says, well, I can tell you for a fact, it's not decomposing. There's no chips. There's no deterioration. It's a really perfect image. But I'm going to tell you 3 other things that I learned from my, infrared testing. Number 1, this cloth, this agave cactus cloth, it was never sized. In other words, it was never put out in some kind of a varnish used to flatten it and to make sure it could be an opaque surface, that you could paint the painting on, without having all kinds of bumps from the fibers, right? All kinds of, irregularly shaped fibers, all kinds of, topologically, all kinds of, different variations in height coming out of this. It is not a canvas that any artist would ever use, ever. Secondly, there's no undersketching. It is a perfect painting. It's almost as if there's no brush strokes whatsoever. There's no undersketching, no sizing. It's almost as if this painting goes plop right onto this agave cactus Tilma in one setting without a single brush mark. You look at that and you go, wow, that's really, really unusual. The fact that it's no sizing. So it's not even a flat, it's bumpy all over the place. And yet that picture is as perfect as it could be. But Callahan goes on further. And he says, well, you know, when I was doing this, I can tell you right now, this is not paint that was applied to the surface. The color is actually embedded in the fabric itself. Now, if you know how hard it is to make a painting where you're actually embedding this into the fabric, right? You know, you'd have to use like a needle, right? It's not just a print on a piece of paper. It's like somebody embedded the pigment into the actual fibers itself. But they did it so precisely that essentially what Callahan discovered is it looks like butterfly wings. In other words, you know, if you look at the coloration of butterfly wings, you know how they can kind of glow, and the coloration can differ depending on the angle that you look at the wing from. And you can actually, if you go further away, if you go further up, you can actually see variations in coloration, that are determined by single fiber coloration. But it's not just coloration within the single fiber. There are variations in the color of each fiber that gives rise to that sort of butterfly wing, coloration. So in other words, each fiber, it's almost like somebody took a needle and made it to resemble a butterfly wing in some kind of an artificial way. And I could tell you right now, we'd be hard-pressed to find that technology today in 1531, an absolute impossibility. But then it has come under the scrutiny of many, many artists. And by the way, it gets weirder and weirder. Under the scrutiny of many artists, and you can see that like thick pieces, thick threads of the agave cactus are protruding, but they're protruding at all the right places. So it makes the Blessed Virgin Mary's eyes look much fuller because of these weird thicknesses of the cactus fiber, which are perfectly integrated into the picture so that the imperfections in the agave cactus are actually creating a more beautiful image of the Blessed Virgin. You can see the fullness of the lips. If you examine her lips more precisely, you can see that those lips look so full because basically these odd-sized, thick, fibers of the cactus, of the agave cactus, they're actually protruding right at the rim line of the lip, both the bottom and the top lip. And there's all kinds of other irregularities in the threads that are actually integrated to make the Blessed Virgin look more beautiful in the canvas. After 40, this guy, Daniel Castellano, he basically got all of these artists to give an opinion, of could they actually do anything like this in this irregular agave cactus. I don't know, maybe it was 32 modern ones, and then he did a kind of a historiography, like throughout history, artists trying to render, the painting, to see if any phenomena like that was ever reported, and he just basically says, this is unique. No artist thinks that they have the capability to integrate perfectly irregularities in the thread, because most artists start off with canvas. They don't have irregular fibers and bumpy cactus, cloths. So the main thing to remember is this is like really difficult to duplicate. And yet, there it is. No diminishment in the color, etc. It was sent also to Germany, for testing, at two different institutes, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Chemistry, and they said, well, this is no known natural pigment. But of course, as I said, there's no synthetic pigments in 1531. Just to let you know, it gets weirder and weirder. So you put all this together, and then we go to 1950, where for the first time, somebody actually is looking at the cloth with a very powerful magnifying glass. And as he's looking there, he can see the Spaniard, right? What you see there is a man who's he has a long beard and he's stroking his beard. You know how tiny the corneas of Our Lady are, and that they're little teeny dots, kind of, the cornea. And you look at that, and there are images in there that you can detect with a magnifying glass. One of them is that they thought was Juan Diego, was really a Spaniard who is stroking his beard. And what's interesting is, are you familiar with the Sanson-Purkinje triple reflection? It's basically, if you look in the reflection in the cornea of your eyes, you can see actually three reflections of the same thing because of the natural curvature of the cornea. You can see, a big right side up image, like in the left and the right eye in this corner right here. Then you see right next to it a smaller right side up image of the same person or object. And then in this remote corner of the right eye, so the most remote corner, right corner, you see an upside down smaller imprint of the same person. Well, that Spaniard is right there with a triple reflection. You can see it very clearly, and of course with microscopy you can see it even much more clear. That cornea on her eye, by the way, on her left eye and her right eye, you can see the Sanson-Purkinje triple reflection of that Spaniard, meaning that the cornea as portrayed, this teeny cornea as portrayed, actually has the proper curvature of a three-dimensional human cornea. That's weird. 1531, the possibility of doing this is zilch. And it wasn't super added afterwards. Second thing, so that makes things weird. Then this guy Lavagnier, French ophthalmologist, says, I'm just got to look and see, if it's got the proper curvature, maybe there are other three-dimensional composites or, characteristics in the eyes of Our Lady. So he decides to see whether there is, the regular depth of, from the retina to the pupil. So he takes an ophthalmoscope, he puts it right into the pupils of the left and the right eye to see if it actually measures. You can actually, if you have the proper focal length on your ophthalmoscope, it'll come up like a big bright diamond will come up, and you can see it very clearly, that the retina, for example, is the proper distance, and you can examine the retina very clearly. What Lavagnier discovered is this painting, which is obviously on a flat, opaque surface, it actually measures the proper depth of the retinal according to the focal lengths. In other words, a wrong focal length of the lens, no white diamond. Proper focal length, white diamond. You can see, but how's that possible? How can you possibly have a three-dimensional characteristic in this eye, which is basically on a two-dimensional surface, not a pure two-dimensional surface, but pretty close to a two-dimensional surface. It's just like weird. That's the only thing you can say about it, but Lavagnier has nobody has contested his findings with ophthalmoscopic analysis. It just hasn't been done. It gets weirder. Now you've got this guy, Dr. Jose Tonsman, Tonsman figures, I got to take a look, if there's one image in the eye, and it's got the Purkinje Sand Syndrome. This guy got his doctorate at Cornell and worked for NASA in image amplification for many years. Anyway, he gets interested in this Tilma because one image found, hey, maybe there's more images. So he does an amplification at 2,500 times. So, and basically you can do that by pixelating the cornea, right? So you just take teeny little pixelated pieces of the cornea, very, very small, and then you amplify each one of those little pixelated places 2,500 times to get the exact amount of light magnitude for each pixelated, XY intersection. So you look at that and, he gets, of course, a highly amplified picture of those corneas. And what he discovers, you can actually, then you have to take out the noise from the irregular threads. You have to take out the noise from the cactus fiber itself, which has a very rough composition. Okay, I want to get to some Lourdes. But anyway, I'm just going to say, okay, take a look. Here you can see 6 figures. This is what he comes up with when the noise is eliminated. So from left to right, you can see a native who's sitting down on like the floor. You can see Zumarraga, the Bishop Zumarraga, sitting kind of on a chair, high forehead, has a beard. You can see the top part of a Franciscan robe. Then talking, translating for the bishop, obviously, is a fellow right next to him translating for the bishop. Then next to him, what you see is a person with a very tall hat that's there, and he's facing in the wrong direction of the other people. That's Juan Diego. He's wearing a typical Indian hat, right? The big long hat that goes way up here, right, with the big flat surface going around it, and you can't see that he's unfurling his tilma, but you can see he's basically addressing or talking to the bishop and his retinue. Then you see a slave girl who's kind of recessed. She's in the back of the group, but everybody's looking on like this, and they're kind of amazed. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you see the Spaniard with the beard. I don't know if Nick can make that audio work, but you maybe can see it a little clearer as you see the superimposition there. Okay, so all I can say is, people said, that Aste Tonsman, he's just cloud reading. And, Aste Tonsman went, no, I'm not. So he went ahead and did a comparison between the left cornea and the right cornea. Do you know the odds of getting, by the way, he had to figure out all of the algorithms in order to convert left curvature to right curvature. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, the position is like she is right behind everybody, and you can see the back of the Blessed Virgin there, and you can see how she's looking on. She's about maybe 2 feet above the ground, and her head is tilted a little to the left. So he had to account for all of these things, plus the difference in the curvature, plus the fact that the left cornea is going to get an image of some things that the right cornea can't get, and the right cornea is going to get an image of some of the things that the left cornea can't get. So then he takes, by the way, you can get an Apple book of this, where he actually shows, he takes the left cornea and superimposes it on the right cornea. And it's almost a perfect superimposition. You can see the figures almost as if, they're identical, right? It brings out, once you do the superimposition, you can see the 6 figures very, very clearly. And not only that, but the odds of having this done by chance, by an artist, by a photographer, etc., are nil. It's just way too small. for normal photography. This is under amplification of 2,500 times. So this is not cloud reading. This, I think, is a very reliable thing. I think Aste Tonsman has really done an excellent job. He's a great amplification engineer, and I think he's reliable. But again, we need more tests. Let's do this again and again and again. As we get newer and newer, capabilities to examine this thing, we should be examining it again and again and again. But preliminarily, what I can say about this tilma is, at the very least, it's weird on all 8 of these levels. And it's very difficult to find a scientific explanation, a naturalistic explanation for the lack of decomposition in this agave cactus fabric, the lack of decomposition in the actual picture of Our Lady, the coloration with the no known natural pigment in the coloration, and the super refined way of the coloration of each thread in the agave cactus to give rise to this butterfly wing phenomenon, right? The lack of any kind of sizing, any kind of brush stroke, any kind of undersketching, etc., etc. It's just absolutely amazing. The fact that there's the three-dimensional. This is easy to see with a magnifying glass. The Spaniard with the beard. You can see the Sensen Purkinje triple reflection. The fact that you've got this ophthalmoscopic analysis that's showing three-dimensionality, in the view from the pupil down to the retina, you can actually see the proper focal length. And then finally, of course, these 6 images, which look like not only the bishop and in his portrait, but Juan Diego in his portrait, and of course the retinue would have been very typical of the retinue of a bishop from that time. I just say, let's have at it. Let's let science have their chance to look at it with greater and greater scrutiny. But if all of these things hold up, it's up to you. You choose. I mean, we don't seem to have a supernatural explanation, but maybe somebody will discover someday how a flat, opaque surface can have three-dimensionality, and maybe somebody will discover someday how in 1531 you could have produced this image and all the reflections on the cornea, etc. I'm not so sure. So that's my thought. Do I have time just to do 3 Lourdes miracles? Okay. Yes? Okay, so I'm just going to do 3. Let's do Pierre de Rudder. There's, like I said, there's 7,000 miracles, and there's a host of them. There are literally hundreds that resemble the miracles I'm going to talk about. Pierre de Rudder, he was cutting down a tree. Tree came, broke the tibia, just whacked the tibia apart. You can see that there is a full inch separation. The bone, there's 1.5 inches of bone is missing between the upper part and the lower part of the tibia. And of course, you can see that each end of the broken bone is necrosed. So it's dead, and dead is dead. So you can't do anything with dead. Now today we could attach something synthetic or artificial to it, but back there, in the late 1800s, you could not do this. Pierre de Rudder's leg, his lower part of the leg, was swinging freely. So it could do 180 degrees that way and 180 degrees that way. In fact, when he got onto the bus to take his tour to Lourdes, he gets on the bus, and the bus driver saw his swinging bottom part of his leg and starts laughing at him. So, of course, Pierre, not to be deterred, goes to the Lourdes shrine. When he gets to the Lourdes shrine, before he even gets to the water at the Lourdes shrine, they had brought water up from the Lourdes shrine in France to Belgium and made a Belgian Lourdes shrine. So they basically, he gets to the Lourdes shrine, and before he even gets there, zing, his leg is completely healed. And he says to his wife, I can stand on my legs without any kind of a device, you know, and she goes, that's impossible. And of course he goes, I can, and I can run too. And the wife faints. So, because she's been living with him, you know, with the freely swinging leg. So he goes and he runs down to the grotto and he kneels in front of the statue of the Blessed Virgin. And of course, everybody is stunned. Now, this guy had been examined by many doctors because he had worked for a very highly placed, you know, aristocrat in Belgium. And so, of course, one of them is one of the foremost osteopaths in Belgium, Switzerland, Germany. And so he calls up this fellow who is an adamant atheist. And he says, you know, I got cured at Lourdes. And this guy goes, baloney, you know, no way. And he goes, I did. And he goes, well, I don't believe you. And he says, well, if you don't believe me, at least you got to do me the service of coming over here. He's a German guy, coming over here to Belgium and, you know, examining me firsthand. And he goes, if you are wrong and I come all the way over there, you know, you haven't heard the last of me. Pierre says, just come. So, of course, ding dong. And Pierre gets up, opens the door, and starts jumping in front of this guy. Kaboom. He fainted, literally fainted, dead out. He goes, I want to examine. This is a twin. He's going through all of this stuff. And, of course, finally he looks at it and he goes, oh, my gosh, the bone. How do you produce 1.5 inches of bone? You don't even have the materials, the minerals in your body to produce 1.5 inches of bone. I mean, literally, it reconstitutes itself. But not only that, every one of the tendons, ligaments, musculature, everything is perfectly healed. Good old Pierre is jumping around like a 2-year-old. All I can tell you is, these guys are absolutely amazing. 6 doctors convert to Christianity on the spot. And the one who was the atheist, the most adamant of the atheists, the big expert osteopath in Germany, that guy actually winds up doing a testimony to, you know, I'm a Christian now, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. But he actually testifies, and before he was very, like Castellan Gomez. Castellan Gomez, when he finished the Eucharistic miracle investigation, he not only became a Catholic, he went around doing lectures on the real presence of Jesus. I mean, like, boom, boom, you know, total flip. Okay, that's just one thing. Let's take one quick thing. Marie Bailey and Alexis Carrel. Alexis Carrel won the Nobel Prize for developing the technique for vascular surgery. Very, very impressive young doctor at the University of Lyon in France. So basically, Alexis Carrel gets talked into going to Lourdes with a doctor friend of his. But Alexis Carrel is at best agnostic, definitely leaning toward atheism. You know, as he goes, you know, this is not the stuff for me. So his friend is very shrewd, and he goes, oh, but Alexis, if you come, you can then prove that it's all just, you know, psychoanalytic, you know, blah, blah, blah. You can give the proof. And, you know, he thinks to himself, yeah, okay, that's worth a bet. You know, I'm going to bet that all of this is psychology. This is just a bunch of emotional flim-flam. I'm going to prove it. So Alexis, his friend winds up getting sick, can't go on the train. Alexis Carrel is by himself on the train going to Lourdes. So Marie Bailey is put on the train at Lourdes. This is a woman who has severe tubercular peritonitis. I mean, we're talking about almost a full 9 inches of distension in the abdomen, right? And, you know, damage everywhere to her organs. She can barely breathe. She's got solid masses. She's got liquid masses in the abdomen that's causing the distension. And of course, Carol goes, what are you letting her on this train for? This is just, you know, now she's under my custody and she's going to die. So basically, she makes it to Lourdes. And Carol says, well, she can't be moved. And of course, the nurse that's traveling with her says, you can't deny her. She's made this train trip. She's got to be moved. We're taking her to the baths, whether it kills her or not. And finally, Alexis Carroll goes, be my guest, do whatever. So, of course, he says, I think I'm going to go with her. So he goes up there to the baths, and because she's so sick, she can't be lowered into the bath. They have to take a big jug of Lourdes water, and they started pouring it on her abdomen. So the first pour, Alexis Carroll's actually timing this with his watch, and he can see the distension going down. In other words, she's losing this distended abdomen, and so he's fascinated, and he's do a second pour. So does the second pour, and again the abdomen goes down, and finally it becomes flat like a normal abdomen. And of course, she begins to breathe normally. Well, that means she's been healed from all the organ damage that's been done, by the peritonitis. So she kind of gets up, and she says, "So I think I've been healed." No kidding. So of course, Alexis Carroll looks around. There's no remnant of the liquid masses, no remnant of the solid masses that had constituted part of the distension, right? All of this is gone. She's completely healed. And Alexis Carroll, he's mystified, but he's very agnostic, and he goes, I don't know. He goes into the Lourdes grotto area, and he's praying all night, and he goes, he had read the Pierre de Rudder story, right? And he goes, my gosh, maybe that story, is correct. Maybe it's happening. And by the way, by this time, there had been well over 100 naturalistically inexplicable cures at Lourdes before Alexis Carroll ever got there. But the main thing, again, is that when he gets there, he kind of says, okay, I have to admit, miracles are possible. But that's all he'll say is miracles are possible. So he goes back to University of Medical School at Lyon, and some guy's talking about that stupid place at Lourdes, and miracles, what a bunch of sham idiocy. And Alexis Carroll goes, well, I'm not so sure. I saw this incident where I'm almost convinced that there could have been a miracle. He didn't say there was, just said there could have been. And the faculty stands up and goes, we don't have any place in this institution for the likes of you. So he goes, okay. So they kicked out the most talented young surgeon they had. And of course, Rockefeller University in New York goes, you got rid of Carroll? Whew. Of course, they get him right away. Bring him to New York, give him all the equipment he wants, give him the money he wants. And of course, as I said, he got the Nobel Prize for inventing the technique for vascular surgery that we still use today. That means that the University of Lyon Medical School has the sole distinction of having kicked out a Nobel Prize winner from their faculty for attesting to the possibility of a miracle. Wow. Anyway, I know that time is running out, but eventually Alexis Carroll sees another miracle of a boy who is born totally blind with a scarred retina. I know about eyes. I can tell you this right now. The scarring of the retina, you're just short of getting a new retina, which you're not going to do, at least not yet. You're not going to get vision back. That boy got his vision back 20/20, like in seconds. And of course, that did it. Alexis Carroll goes, okay, there's something really weird happening at this Lourdes place. I'm going for it. And he actually, he did convert before he died, and became Catholic again, thanks to a Trappist monk who was a good friend of his. Just let me give one more, let me just give John Trainer, I think. Gabriel Gargam, and about 50% of the miracles at Lourdes happen with a combination of the Lourdes water and a Eucharistic blessing. So I've got several cases of this in my book, Christ, Science, and Reason. And by the way, you can read about these if you download free of charge Magis AI. Just download that app and ask it anything about science, reason, faith, etc. I'll get to it in a moment. But the main thing with John Trainer is, okay, he basically is a true World War I hero. He's got a a hole so big in his forehead that you can see his brain thumping. So they have to put in a piece of metal into that place so you don't see thumping brain, right? Obviously, he's got, he was shot twice, in Gallipoli, and he had severed nerves, severed muscles. His right arm was completely detached. He went through several surgeries to try and repair the muscle and nerve damage. None of them worked, made it worse. Then he started, wasting away because of the damage. He had a bullet that went into his stomach, and of course it prevented him from eating. So here's this big 220-pound strapping 6'2" guy, and of course he's wasting away in a wheelchair when he used to take 200-pound bags of coal and just put them on his shoulders. He's wasting away to nothing, and then he starts getting 4 epileptic seizures a day. The guy is totaled out, and he just says, I'm taking my last a pound. I want to go on that Lourdes tour. And he begs the bishop, and the bishop goes, you're a basket case. You cannot go. It's impossible. And of course, John Trainer says, I'm not going. Here's my money, and I want to go. Well, we're not to blame if you die on the way. You're not, and he repeats it, you guys are not to blame if I die on the way. So off he goes to Lourdes. They put him into the bath. And of course, they take him out again. They actually put a cloth on his face because they thought he died after he went into the bath. That was the end of John Trainer. But no, they take they're bringing him back. These, people who they have these little carts that they bring him on, and they're like, volunteers, and they're bringing him back to the hostel for his funeral. And this bishop sees the poor guy, and gives him a Eucharist, with a monstrance. You put the Eucharist in, and gives a big blessing to John Trainer, who then turns around, gets up out of his cart, and everybody goes, "You can't do that," and he goes, "But I'm hungry." So they say, "Well, you haven't eaten anything, normally for several years." "I know, but I can now." And then he goes, I better go see the Blessed Virgin and thank her. So he runs down to the grotto. Have you ever been to Lourdes, any of you? Yeah, there's hills. It's a good run. And of course, he goes zooming down there and kneels there for almost an hour in front of the grotto or the Blessed Virgin. He comes back, he eats this hearty meal, and of course, he goes back to Birmingham. And of course, when he gets back there, of course, everybody is going, wow. They're making a movie about him, by the way. But anyway, long and short of it is, he gets this complete healing. Now just imagine thousands of these things all associated with one place, Lourdes. This doesn't happen, you can say, oh, maybe it happens around the world, 100 times. How do you get 7,000 naturalistically inexplicable events that have been scientifically examined by the Lourdes Medical Bureau that have happened in just one place? And by the way, it's not just 7,000. It's more like 35,000, about 5 times the number. Because 5 times the number of people who get healed at Lourdes, I know 2 of them. 5 times the number of people who get healed at Lourdes will not go to the Lourdes Medical Commission for an exam, because you're going to have 20 doctors poking and prodding them. You're going to have to bring in all your records beforehand. You're going to have to subject yourself to 10 years of going back to Lourdes, or having a doctor examine you and present all the medical records, going to 10 years, and then have systematic investigations all the way until the end of your life to make sure sure that it's a permanent cure. It has to be an near instantaneous cure, etc. People just don't want to do it. They just say, I got my cure, I'm going home. And that's what they do. Anyway, thank you for your patience, but miracles happen. Miracles happen in the 21st century. They have been subject to the scrutiny of science, very careful scrutiny of really excellent scientists. And this is just a sampler. If you're interested in more of this kind of thing, well, of course, here's my book, Christ, Science, and Reason. You can always get that. But if you want a free resource that you can just download right now from Apple Store or Google Play Store, here's the QR codes. Take a picture, it's free of charge. Or if you want, just go to Apple Store and type in Magis AI, M-A-G-I-S-A-I, all one word, and just download it free of charge. Ask it anything. Ask it anything about science, reason, faith, quantum mechanics, quantum theory, whether or not quarks at absolute zero can be motionless. Ask them whatever. Ask them about these Lourdes miracles. Ask about whether or not you can have a phenomenon like a quantum mechanical interaction in temporality that would be almost an enigma of time. Ask it whether, ask it whatever you wish. Just say, hey, Magis, will a fourth level multiverse rule out God? And it'll tell you no, because a fourth level multiverse, according to the two models that are present right now, would require a beginning for 4 reasons. Bang, 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 bang. And I'll just tell you. And the point I'm trying to get to is, if you want to know how to pray, ask Magis AI. It'll give you a whole technique. If you want to know about scripture passages that you just couldn't, like, how in the world could Moses possibly tell everybody to kill everybody, man, woman, and child? Get Cardinal Ratzinger's explanation for how that works and how you have 4 stages of moral development in the Old Testament. If you want to learn about the rules of hermeneutics for both Old and New Testament, ask Magis AI. It's all free, comprehensive explanations, curated database. Take the picture, download it now. Anyway, thank you for your kind attention this evening, and I hope that you got a sense of me.